Veterans in Transition is sponsored by HireVeteransFirst.com, Jelani Consulting, and Village Connector Community.
Welcome to Veterans in Transition, where we promote the veteran community. Each week, we travel around the region highlighting veteran-related news, issues, and events. In this episode of Veterans in Transition, retired United States Naval Admiral Cecil Haney. Admiral Haney spent nearly 40 years in the United States Navy, retiring as the Commander, United States Strategic Command. Admiral Haney was responsible for the global command and control of the U.S. strategic forces involving missile defense, space, cyberspace, and electronic warfare. General Larry Spencer sat down with Admiral Haney in this segment of Generally Speaking.
Admiral Haney, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate not only you being here, but your service to our nation. We have several things in common, but one in particular is we were both born and raised in the D.C. area. So tell us a little bit about your experience growing up in D.C.
I grew up in D.C. first on Elliott Street, but when I got to be 2 years old, we moved to Kentucky Avenue in Southeast, right near Lincoln Park area. So I got to stay in that same house all the way up through going off to the United States Naval Academy. It was a African-American community. We didn't call it Capitol Hill at the time frame, it's called that now. But it was one where we were close as families growing up in that area. Only had to go around the corner to school, to Bryan Elementary, and that was easy. And then I ended up attending 2 junior high schools because they were how they redistrict during the process. Mm-hmm. Elliott and Hine Junior High was where I spent most of the time at before going off to Eastern High School.
Sure. What was life like at Eastern?
An interesting school. It was a time frame where we were having a lot of problems with drugs in school, but at the same time, since I was interested in science and math, we had some great teachers in that regard, and consequently, it really afforded me a way to get a good education from secondary schools, even though the namesake of Eastern had some baggage with it to a certain degree. Now, I was motivated in a certain way because my older sister preceded me, and when I walked in the door of Eastern High School, all the teachers challenged me and said, "Are you going to be like your sister, or are you just going to be knucklehead,
Sure.
Cecil Haney?" So needless to say, there was pressure of trying to be as good as she was, because she was a great student. So it was good having her role model ahead of me coming through, and it motivated me to work hard. And of course, I had 2 parents, none that had had the opportunity to go to college, but really pushed on me and my siblings the business of going off to school, to college, and quite frankly, without that piece, I perhaps wouldn't be sitting here talking to you
Sure.
about things.
Sure. Now, how did you end up at the Naval Academy?
What happened in my last 2 summers in high school, they had a summer jobs program to get us knuckleheads off the street. And I got fortunate enough to work, believe it or not, for the Navy. It was NAVSEA Systems Command, located in Crystal City, Virginia. Had a glorified title as a math aide, but really all I was a key punch operator for those mainframe computers where you fed all the... But I had a couple of good bosses, one lady named Cynthia White, and she encouraged me to learn computer programming while I was there. And it was another one of these jobs, though, that was good in nature, and that it got us around to see different military labs, Cotterock Merlin, Navy Research Lab, and what have you. And it got a lot of good exposure to things that I would have perhaps never had an opportunity to see.
Sure.
In that regard. Well, anyway, while I was there, they asked me the same question: what are you going to do when you graduate from high school? And I said, I'm going to enlist in the Army, because I didn't have enough resources to go off to college, and felt the only way I was going to do that. I was militarily inclined. The only thing I knew more about was the Army, because we had this show called Combat.
Right, I remember
with Vic
that.
Morris.
No, I do remember that.
And I used to watch that, and that sort of influenced me that, you got to go in and think about being in the Army. I didn't know anything about the Navy. Well, when I told these employers that I worked for that, because they were trying to get me to look at coming back and working for them after I graduated, they actually were resourceful. They found a Navy 06 that I had never seen before in my dealings there. And that captain sat me down and talked to me about Naval ROTC and the academies. And about, so as a result, I ended up applying to all the ROTC programs and the academies. Ironically enough, the one that didn't accept me was the Air Force, Air Force anything.
Right.
So I could go to I had selection to go to West Point, to the military academy there, the Naval Academy, and even the Coast Guard Academy. Oh. And so that sort of started opening up my eyes to possibilities of what I could go do. Not really sure now that I've had more exposure what I want to do, but I said Naval Academy, I can pound on the ground with the Marine Corps. I have aviation opportunities and surface ship opportunities. The thought of being a submariner never even crossed my mind at the time frame. And it was close to home. So I said, boy, I have an opportunity here to learn more about it before selecting a particular area. And as a result, that's why I ended up selecting the Naval Academy.
DC has a lot of things, and ocean is not one of them. So how did you end up majoring in ocean engineering?
Good question, Larry. The fact of the matter was, when I applied, Naval Academy had this pre-med major, and I was really interested in that. As I got there the first day, they handed me a little sheet of paper and said the pre-med program is no longer available. And of course it was too late to do an about face then, because I had my heart set on being a medical doctor. So then, like everything else, I started exploring what else is there, and learned that this discipline called engineering, which I knew very little bit about as I got in, and I said, well, boy, that looks interesting. And then through that, looking through the portfolio of engineering, ocean engineering just sort of whet my appetite in terms of a major associated with Navy, ocean profession, and what have you, and get engineering at the same time.
Oh, great. So now most of us, I would say most normal people, don't really think about being encapsulated in a submarine, hundreds of feet under the water. What drew you to that?
It was a long journey for me to get to that point. One, getting the exposure to Naval Academy of submarines, and sort of liked the idea of small crew size and the ability that it was all about stealth. And I said, boy, in a war fight, that sounds like good qualities to have. But I really liked the idea of small crews, because you get to know the people you're serving with in a much more intimate way, in that regards. But as I entered the Naval Academy, I was still interested in pounding the ground. So I started doing things to be a better Marine. And quite frankly, one of those things I had signed up was for Jungle Warfare School on one of my summers, and it got canceled. So the next thing I signed up for was airborne training with actually the Army in Fort Benning, Georgia. And jumping out of those perfectly good airplanes, I started thinking a little bit more about, well, what do I really want to do? And one day, just to show you how naive I was at that particular point, I remember the bus was taking us to another site there, and I looked over and I saw these second lieutenants, literally looking over at this grass cutting that was going on. And, I grew up making my extra money, cutting grass, washing cars. And I said, it was sort of a wake-up epiphany, if you will, of you need to start thinking deeply. What do you really want to do in terms of looking at the military long-term as a career? Because my dad, who had served in the Army just during the World War II period, he kept beating in my head, this is a great opportunity. You ought to look at being in the military for 20 years and retiring. Now, don't just look at whatever your commitment is from whatever academy you go to. So as a result, that's when I started really looking at all the other opportunities closely. So when I went to the aviation side and they flipped me upside down in those airplanes and I got a little airsick, I said, that's clearly not for me.
Sure.
Cecil Haney needs to find another sport. And, I finally studying engineering and my engineering buddies and all, because there was a sort of a group of us that got interested in submarines, some from the beginning, some it grew on. I said, well, if I go to this Admiral Rickover interview and he accepts me, then I want to go submarines.
You have any idea back when you were a young submariner that you would end up one day a four-star admiral?
Not at all. Quite frankly, that clearly wasn't in my vision whatsoever. Even while I was at the Naval Academy, and even though exposed to admirals, I didn't know any personally. But my real goal was I wanted to command a submarine. I wanted to command a Navy ship. And that was the appetite for me of that goalpost you wanted to get to, so that you could see, could you lead that kind of an organization, independent operations, disappearing from the face of the planet, doing that submarine sneaky stuff or deterrent patrols, and coming back. So I ended up getting command of a fast attack submarine, and as a result, really had 2 good deployments there. But it was those building blocks up to that, of course, made a difference. I was surprised all the way up to being selected, because I didn't think I was in that. Even as I got to be a senior captain, 06, I didn't think I had all the things I needed to be even selected, because most of the flag officers we have had some tour as somebody's executive assistant or chief of staff and what have you. And I had, just different kind of jobs along the way.
Right.
And so I wasn't even thinking about it. And then one day I get this call from Admiral Vernon Clark, who was the CNO, saying, you're selected to be an admiral. And that was a bit of a surprise to me. So it was never one of those in my foresight.
Well, obviously, to become a four-star admiral, not only were you very technically competent, but you were also a strong leader. Are there 2 or 3 sort of leadership traits or principles that you used during your career that you thought were very successful that you think other folks might benefit from? First
and foremost is really having deep respect for the shipmates you have, your teammates that you have associated with the organization that you're in. It is the people that make a difference to whether the organization succeeds or not, regardless of the challenges facing that organization. And they are so important, in the business. So that would clearly be number one. You have to be able to lead with enthusiasm, passion, and humbleness in terms of, I think, in taking a team and being able to do things that you have good days, you have bad days, you have challenging days, and what have you. In that regard. And I think you have to be competent in terms of really understanding the business. What I loved about submarining was you learned the nuts and bolts from being a division officer to department head, etc. So you really understood the machinery that made all the magic of that submarine going from point A to point B. I would add, though, to it is, and I had to learn this, because I wasn't this talkative when Cecil Haney graduated from high school and went off to the Naval Academy. You have to be able to communicate what you want done, why that's important, so that when you do have to make a decision X, Y, or Z, it gets executed, while at the same time humble enough so that your subordinates will say, hey, but Captain, that's not a good idea right now. And you get that feedback integrated and are able to make the right decision, associated with that piece.
Sure.
So I think that's the magic for me.
In addition to being an American sailor, essentially, for our country, you were also an African American serving in the Navy. Any challenges that you ran into in the Navy, being African American? As you know, unfortunately, for all the services, diversity at the senior levels is still a problem. It's not what most people think it should be. What was your experience with that in the Navy?
I will say I was blessed to have some good leaders, first off, through every tour I had. And even though they were not African American, they treated me as one of members of the wardroom in a tight group from that regard. My biggest one that I remember way back was, quite frankly, when I was at the Naval Academy, and I had some majority midshipmen stop me in the hallway and say, you're only here because of quotas. Well, that comment actually had I think the inverse effect he was looking for, because all that did was make my blood boil and thirsty for being the best midshipman I could possibly be. I will say I was disappointed all the way up through retirement, though, of just how far we have to go in terms of growing more folks of color in our military ranks, in our senior ranks. In that regard, I think we've gone a lot better in the Navy in getting the input. Now the piece is, how do we nurture that so that they stay longer and they have an understanding that they can go as far as they want to go. And that piece is interesting. I just spent last week down at the National Naval Officers Association, NNOA, and there we have, since I was a young officer, an organization by which we could come together and really talk about issues, learn other morsels associated with leadership and what have you from folks who were senior to us. And so, the real piece for me of going back there was, again, to see what the young officers in particular thought, and what kind of things should we be doing better at from their perspective.
Think back for a second when you pinned on your 4th star. What were your thoughts?
Well, I was in awe because I was really I was expecting to retire. I was Deputy Commander at U.S. Strategic Command then. And I was really thinking, this is the last tour of duty for me. I'm going to give it all I had, and then I'm going to start looking at what do I want to do next. And when I got a call that I was even being contemplated for that, I was amazed by it. So I was pinned on, actually, they were shoulder boards, in Hawaii. And this was a really unique piece for me, because with all those years of being in Hawaii, I could never get my mother to fly out there because she just did not like airplanes.
Sure.
But she wanted to see the promotion. She says, why can't you do that promotion like you did the 3 stars in the Pentagon? I said, Mom, you got to do it where you're at. That's the way it goes. So she came out there. Oh, wow. And to have her there, and my other siblings, uncle, aunt, be able to witness that piece really made it special for me on one accord. The other one, just thinking of the responsibility that I was going to have to be the Pacific Fleet Commander, given the vastness of that area, the complexity of all the players in that region. Sure. I really found myself incredibly blessed to be able to be an Admiral 1-star or anything, but particularly there, having spent some time in Hawaii, really having a deep respect for that Pacific area of responsibility and the things that went on, whether it was working with our allies, Japan, South Korea, what have you. China was on the rise at that point, but even just the thinking of how we try to work together with those other navies that are interested in working with the United States of America.
Probably most Americans don't understand the gravity and the sheer responsibility of leading Strategic Command, which you got to do. Essentially, responsible for all our country's nuclear assets, among other things. What was it like to know that you're the guy that could launch nuclear ICBMs, as an example, or nuclear bombers for that matter?
You know, I was always thankful that I'd been deputy commander, U.S. Strategic Command, because I had always said, boy, that would have been a mouthful coming in as
Sure.
Your job as a strategic command, given so many different areas. You know, you had nuclear, you had missile defense, you had cyber, as you brought up, weapons of mass destruction, electronic warfare. You know, it was just a tremendous list, and you were doing this globally, having a global intelligence monitoring capability to be able to see if somebody was going to launch anything. Is it coming toward the United States of America? Do we think it's nuclear? Is it going toward one of our allies, and those kind of things? So it just really was another one of those where you pinched yourself and said, why me? But boy, what an awesome responsibility. So as a result, you know, I took each day very, very seriously, starting off trying to get a heartbeat of what have I missed while I was asleep. And to me, it wasn't just where we see this being launched. It was driving the intelligence community and others. We got to understand well before something's on a launch pad that country X, Y, or Z is planning on doing something, so we have time to do something else than just responding.
Sure.
And it was really good in getting together, working with our other combatant commands, because there was only 9 at the time frame, and being able to work at that level with our Secretary of Defense and President as our bosses required a lot of collaboration and work at a time frame where Russia was becoming more resurgent, and China was growing in leaps and bounds in terms of their overall overarching capability and doing things in the South China Sea and what have you that really got our attention.
So thinking back over, you know, a young guy in D.C. growing up, cutting grass, washing cars, progressing up through the Naval Academy, becoming a flag officer, going all the way to 4 stars, and one of the largest military jobs that anyone can have. What were your thoughts when you retired on that retirement day, when they were going to pipe you for the last time, blow the whistle for the last time? As you were standing there on the stage, what were your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts were many. You know, first I was really thankful to have had such a career of opportunities that I was able to take advantage of and be able to have some success in each of those. I was thankful for the fact that my family had been with me through that journey, you know, them being dragged around from place to place, as you have
Sure.
experienced as well. And with it, you know, you are really thankful to have been able to complete, you know, I got married very shortly after the Naval Academy, and Miss Bonnie and I went through that whole journey together, which, you know, I was really grateful for. The piece for me was, boy, what will I do with all this as I step off the stage? We're all groomed to know that the way our business works, you expect to have a relief that's competent,
Right.
that's going to take your place and hopefully do better than you did
Sure.
in terms of things. So that I had no regrets of taking the uniform off and getting to go and be a retired individual. It was, boy, now how do I split this 1/3 pie up? 1/3 family, 3, the time frame was just 2 beautiful grandsons, now 3. 1/3 family, 1/3 professional, keeping your oar in the water to as best you can to keep that professional brain side going, and then 1/3 community. So it was then, you know, sort of think about, okay, how will I do this? But I said, first and foremost, it's time to get some rest and think about things.
Sure.
And but I was really in awe. And you know, you also sort of think back when you're up there on that stage of just how many people worked for you or you worked for them that got you there, when you think about it as a whole, and you end up in awe thinking it's not about me, it's really about all those influencers,
Right.
from parents all the way up, you know, as you're trying to take your change of command retirement speech and put it into how do I thank this mass in such a short period of time, ultimately in that regard. And you hope and pray through all that your legacy would be the people that you have been associated with that are younger than you, that are continuing to carry that baton forward through our business so that we can maintain the best military on the planet.
That's all for this edition of Veterans in Transition. We ask that you like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. If you have a story idea, reach out to us at vetsintransition.com. And remember, we all have a story to tell. Until next time.